Smoke hung thick in the air, curling like ghostly tendrils around the shattered remains of the battlefield. Lieutenant Nathan Cole's chest heaved as he crouched behind the jagged hull of a destroyed rover, gripping his rifle with white-knuckled hands. The sharp tang of burnt metal and ozone filled his nostrils, a stark reminder of the chaos that had just unfolded. Around him, the scorched plains of HFY stretched endlessly, the ground cracked and seething from the relentless bombardment of alien artillery. "Lieutenant, we need orders!" Private Lorne's voice crackled over the comms, panicked but restrained, her training barely holding her fear in check. Cole glanced over the edge of the rover's remains. In the distance, towering insectoid figures emerged from the smoke, Vaelid soldiers. Their iridescent exoskeletons shimmered like oil slicks under the dim light of Orath's twin suns. The Vaelids moved with eerie precision, their segmented legs clicking against the rocky ground as they tightened their perimeter around the human strike team. They were closing in. Cole tapped his helmet's interface, his voice calm despite the storm raging around him. "Lorne, pull the wounded back to the rendezvous point. Take as many as you can. Now." "But, sir, what about—" "That's an order, Private," Cole interrupted, his tone sharpening. "Go!" Lorne hesitated for a heartbeat, but the sound of heavy plasma fire nearby spurred her into action. Cole could hear her muffled curses as she barked commands to the others, her footsteps retreating into the haze. He exhaled slowly, steadying himself. They wouldn't all make it out alive. He'd known that the moment the mission had gone sideways. He adjusted his grip on his rifle and scanned the horizon. His visor displayed a flurry of data, heat signatures, trajectories, and the rapidly dwindling ammunition count for his squad. It didn't matter. His job now wasn't to fight his way out. It was to buy time. A sharp whistle cut through the air, followed by an earth-shaking blast. The ground beneath Cole trembled violently, throwing him forward onto the dusty ground. Heat licked at his back, and he felt the fine grit of dirt grind against his teeth as he scrambled to his feet. "Human!" a guttural voice echoed through the battlefield, alien yet disturbingly intelligible. Cole turned to see a Vaelid commander looming over him, easily 7 feet tall, with serrated mandibles clicking in a menacing rhythm. The alien's compound eyes gleamed with cruel amusement. "Your end has come," the Vaelid rasped, its voice reverberating like metal dragged over stone. Cole didn't answer. He raised his rifle and fired. A precise, controlled burst aimed at the creature's jointed limbs. The plasma bolt struck true, but instead of collapsing, the Vaelid barely flinched. Its exoskeleton absorbed the impact, glowing faintly as it dissipated the energy. The alien's laugh, a grating, chittering sound, cut through the din of the battlefield. "Pathetic!" it sneered, lunging forward with blinding speed. Cole rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding the sweep of its bladed forelimbs. His mind raced, analyzing every move, every vulnerability. But before he could act, another explosion roared behind him, and a concussive wave slammed into his back. His vision blurred, and the world tilted sideways as he hit the ground hard. When he opened his eyes, the battle was over. The oppressive silence that followed was more jarring than the chaos. Cole's helmet lay cracked beside him, its interface flickering weakly. His wrists were bound with glowing restraints, the energy humming faintly against his skin. Around him, the alien soldiers stood in eerie stillness, their predatory gazes fixed on him like vultures circling carrion. "Take him," the Vaelid commander ordered, its mandibles clicking in satisfaction. "The brittle one may amuse us." The prison aboard the Vaelid dreadnought, Zaltorath, was a stark contrast to the chaos of the battlefield. Cold, sterile walls pulsed faintly with an alien bioluminescence, casting the narrow corridors in shifting hues of green and blue. The air was thick and damp, carrying the faint, acrid scent of ammonia that stung Cole's nostrils. They marched him past rows of cells, each containing prisoners from various species, some unrecognizable, others eerily humanoid. Their hollow eyes followed him as he passed, silent witnesses to his capture. The Vaelid guards chittered among themselves, their alien voices a mix of disdain and glee. At last, they shoved him into a cell. The energy barrier hummed to life behind him, its faint glow casting long shadows across the walls. Cole staggered forward but steadied himself, his senses sharpening as he took in his surroundings. The cell was sparse. A single slab of alien material served as a bed, and a metallic tray lay discarded in the corner. From across the barrier, a Vaelid guard studied him with cold amusement. Its exoskeleton gleamed under the bioluminescent lights, a kaleidoscope of shifting colors. "How fragile you are," the guard rasped, its heavily accented voice dripping with mockery. "How did your kind ever crawl from the dirt, let alone reach the stars?" Cole sat on the edge of the slab, his face unreadable. He said nothing, letting the alien's words hang in the air. Instead, he observed every movement, every sound, every flicker of the energy barrier. His dark eyes tracked the guard's subtle shifts, the rhythm of its mandible clicks, the way its weight shifted from one leg to another. The Vaelid tilted its head, unnerved by his silence. "Are you broken already, human? Or do you think your defiance means anything here?" Still, Cole remained silent. His mind worked methodically, piecing together the layout of the facility from the fragmented glimpses he'd caught during his march. The guards rotated every 6 hours. The energy barrier flickered during maintenance cycles. The air vents hummed in rhythmic intervals, suggesting an automated filtration system. The guard leaned closer, its mandibles twitching. "You will scream, like the others," it hissed. "Your species is weak. You will learn this soon." Cole finally looked up, his expression calm but his gaze sharp as a blade. "Weakness," he said quietly, his voice steady. "You don't understand the meaning of that word." The alien recoiled slightly, confused by the human's composure. It lingered for a moment longer before clicking its mandibles in irritation and retreating down the corridor. Alone, Cole leaned back against the cold wall, his breathing steady. The faint hum of the energy barrier resonated in his ears, a rhythmic pulse that matched the quickening pace of his thoughts. His body ached, his muscles screaming for rest, but his mind was sharper than ever. They thought he was broken. They thought he was beaten. They were wrong. And soon they would learn just how costly their mistake had been. The cell was colder than before, as if the walls themselves leached heat from the air. Nathan Cole's breath condensed faintly in front of him, curling like ghostly whispers before vanishing into the sterile dampness. He leaned against the wall, his thoughts a relentless storm, untangling and reassembling every detail he'd observed since his capture. The faint hum of the energy barrier pulsed in his ears, rhythmic and steady like a heartbeat. It was almost soothing, a constant in the silence. But to Cole, it wasn't just a sound. It was a flaw, a pattern waiting to be exploited. His mind latched onto the smallest details, the faint flicker in the barrier every 6 hours, the way the guards paced with military precision but hesitated near blind corners. Every fragment of their arrogance was ammunition. The next guard rotation began with the heavy thud of boots against the metallic floor. Cole tilted his head slightly, pretending to rest, but his gaze flickered to the new pair. 2 Vaelids, one tall and scarred, the other smaller with a faint limp. They didn't speak as they passed, their mandibles twitching as they scanned his cell. Cole didn't need their words. Their body language told him enough. The smaller one would be slower to react. The scarred one led with confidence, overconfidence. As soon as they disappeared, Cole turned his attention to the food tray discarded in the corner. It was made of a lightweight, silvery material, not quite metal, not quite plastic. It wasn't the tray itself that interested him, but its reflective surface. He ran his fingers along its edge, feeling the faint grooves where he had scratched lines during his last meal. They had been testing scratches for weeks, each line a calculated experiment in how the material refracted light. A faint noise pulled his focus. From the next cell, a low, raspy breath echoed, a voice, weak but steady. Human. The word was barely audible, spoken in a tongue unfamiliar to most ears but somehow understandable. Cole shifted his gaze to the source. Across the shimmering barrier, the figure of a thin alien leaned heavily against the wall. Its skin shimmered faintly in the low light, iridescent but dulled by grime. Its voice carried a texture like crushed glass, rough but strangely articulate. "You don't scream like the others," it said, watching him through slitted, luminescent eyes. Cole considered the words carefully, weighing whether this was another test, a subtle Vaelid trick to break his silence. But something in the alien's posture spoke of shared pain, of a common enemy. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice steady but low enough not to carry. The alien tilted its head, the movement slow and deliberate. "Tarsus. Engineer. Taken from my outpost in the Drull Nebula." A pause, then a flicker of curiosity. "You?" "Lieutenant Nathan Cole," he replied, "captured on Aurath V." His tone was even, betraying neither bitterness nor fear. "Why are you talking to me?" Tarsus's mandibles twitched, not unlike a grimace. "Because I've watched you. The Vaelids laugh, but you are not idle. Your silence is sharp." Cole's lips quirked slightly, a faint shadow of a smile that vanished as quickly as it appeared. "And what are you, Tarsus? Sharp or idle?" The alien made a low, rasping sound that might have been laughter. "Neither. Broken tools can still teach lessons." The conversation was brief, but it planted a seed. Tarsus's knowledge of Vaelid systems could be invaluable, if he could be trusted. Cole filed the interaction away, another piece of the ever-growing puzzle. Hours passed. The cell lights dimmed, signaling what the Vaelids might consider night. Cole waited, his senses tuned to the rhythm of the facility. The hum of machinery was fainter now, underscored by a subtle vibration through the floor, an indication of power cycling. It was time. He moved to the tray, lifting it gently to avoid drawing attention. The scratches he'd made earlier caught the dim light, casting faint patterns on the wall. He adjusted the angle carefully, tilting the tray to direct the beam toward the barrier's base. The flicker was almost imperceptible, a brief disruption in the otherwise steady pulse of energy. Cole marked the timing in his head. 6 seconds, give or take, enough to slip through, if the timing was perfect. The barrier hummed louder, a subtle change as the maintenance cycle concluded. Cole let out a slow breath, setting the tray aside as he leaned back against the wall. He needed more data, more precision. Rushing now would be suicidal. The next day, the Vaelids returned, with their mockery. The scarred guard lingered near the barrier, its mandibles twitching in amusement. "Your people fall easily," it said, its voice a guttural rasp. "Soon, there will be none left to scream for you." Cole didn't respond. His silence clearly irritated the creature, which clicked its mandibles loudly before stalking away. The smaller guard hesitated, its limp more pronounced now. Cole's eyes narrowed, tracking the alien's movement. Weak point. Exploitable. Later during the feeding cycle, Tarsus spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. "The barriers," he rasped. "They hum louder during power shifts. Weak spots." Cole's eyes flicked to the alien, his expression unreadable. "What do you know about their systems?" Tarsus hesitated, his luminescent gaze flickering like a dying ember. "Enough to break them, not enough to survive alone." "Then we help each other," Cole said firmly. It wasn't a request. Tarsus tilted his head, considering the human. "You speak as though you are certain of escape. The Vaelids. They do not make mistakes." "They made one when they captured me," Cole replied, his voice low but laced with conviction. That night, while the facility slumbered in artificial quiet, Cole worked. He dismantled the metallic tray, stripping it into thin, pliable strips. Each piece reflected light differently, creating a crude array of mirrors. He tested the angles repeatedly, adjusting for the curvature of the barrier's pulse. Every adjustment was meticulous, deliberate. When the lights dimmed again, signaling another maintenance cycle, Cole sat cross-legged on the floor, his makeshift tools hidden in the shadows. The plan was forming piece by piece like a mosaic built from fragments of broken glass. It wasn't perfect yet. But he didn't need perfect. He needed possible. As he closed his eyes, feigning rest, the faint sound of Tarsus's breathing reached him from across the barrier. It was steady, purposeful, a rhythm that matched his own. In that moment, Cole felt the weight of the fight ahead, not just for him, but for every prisoner in this forsaken place, for the people he'd sworn to protect. The Vaelids thought they had him contained. They thought the brittle human was powerless. But they had given him exactly what he needed. Time. Time to watch. Time to learn. And soon, time to strike. The hum of the facility deepened as the next maintenance cycle began, a resonant vibration that made the walls seem alive. Nathan Cole sat cross-legged on the cold floor, his breathing steady, but his mind coiled like a spring. Each detail from the past week flickered through his thoughts, every observation slotting into place. The crude tools he had fashioned lay hidden in the shadows beside him, their makeshift forms betraying nothing of their lethal purpose. Tarsus stirred in the neighboring cell, his faint shuffling barely audible above the rhythmic pulse of the energy barrier. "Cycle begins soon," the alien murmured, his voice a rasped blend of anticipation and caution. Cole didn't respond immediately. Instead, he tilted his head, his dark eyes fixed on the barrier. It flickered faintly at its edges, a subtle shimmer most would overlook. But Cole didn't overlook anything. His mind dissected every nuance, every crack in the facade of invulnerability. Finally he spoke, his voice low enough not to carry beyond the walls. "How much time do we have before the next guard rotation?" Tarsus hesitated. 18 clicks. Enough for the first step, if you don't fail." Cole's lips pressed into a thin line. "Failure's not an option." As the barrier's hum shifted, signaling the start of its power cycling, Cole moved. His hands worked with deliberate precision, placing the strips of reflective metal in the exact positions he had mapped out in his mind. The faint light of the bioluminescent walls refracted off the makeshift mirrors, creating a lattice of shimmering beams that danced across the cell like a restless spirit. He adjusted the final strip, angling it toward the base of the barrier. The light bent sharply, a concentrated beam striking the barrier's weak point. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sharp crackle, the energy flickered, its steady hum stuttering like a faltering heartbeat. Tarsus let out a low, guttural sound that might have been admiration or apprehension. "You disrupt it, but not for long." "That's all I need," Cole replied, his voice tight with focus. He pressed his back against the wall, waiting for the precise moment when the barrier would falter entirely. The flicker came suddenly, the energy vanishing in a blink before reasserting itself. In that heartbeat of vulnerability, Cole surged forward, his movements swift and fluid. He slipped through the opening and hit the ground on the other side, rolling to absorb the impact. The air outside the cell was colder, sharper, laced with the metallic tang of alien machinery. The corridor stretched ahead like a throat, its walls pulsing faintly, as if the facility itself were alive. Cole crouched low, his senses on high alert. His breathing was shallow, his muscles coiled, every nerve in his body attuned to the faintest sound. Behind him, Tarsus pressed against the barrier of his own cell, his luminous eyes gleaming. "You go alone?" Cole glanced back, his expression unreadable. "For now. But this doesn't end with me." Without another word, he moved, his steps soundless against the metal floor. The air vibrated with the faint hum of the facility's systems, a symphony of clicks, whirs, and distant machinery that masked his movements. Every shadow became an ally, every flicker of light a potential threat. The first guard appeared at the far end of the corridor, its towering form illuminated by the bioluminescent glow. Cole pressed himself into the nearest alcove, his breath held as he studied the alien's movements. It walked with the deliberate pace of one who believed itself untouchable, its compound eyes scanning lazily. Cole's fingers tightened around a shard of reflective metal he had kept as a weapon. The guard passed within striking distance, its mandibles clicking faintly. In one swift motion, Cole struck, aiming for the joint between its armored plates. The shard bit deep, a wet, snapping sound accompanying the alien's collapse. Cole caught the body before it hit the ground, lowering it silently. His pulse pounded in his ears as he retrieved the guard's weapon, a sleek alien firearm that hummed with dormant power. Its design was unfamiliar, its weight strange in his hands, but necessity didn't allow hesitation. The facility seemed to breathe around him as he moved deeper into its labyrinthine corridors. Every step was calculated, every turn deliberate. He passed more cells, each containing prisoners of various species. Their eyes followed him, silent and watchful. But he couldn't risk freeing them, not yet. The plan required precision, and one misstep would mean death for all of them. Ahead, the corridor opened into a larger chamber, its ceiling arching high above. Strange organic structures lined the walls, pulsating faintly with light. The air here was thicker, carrying a faint, acrid scent that burned his nostrils. Cole crouched behind a support pillar, his eyes scanning the room. Two guards stood at attention near a console, their postures rigid but their focus lax. Cole's mind worked quickly. The console was critical. It controlled the barrier system for the entire cell block. If he could disable it, he could create the chaos needed to mask his escape. He moved silently, the alien firearm steady in his hands. The first shot was precise, striking one guard squarely in the thoracic joint. The creature crumpled with a choked sound, its mandibles twitching in surprise. The second guard barely had time to react before Cole fired again, the weapon's energy blast leaving a smoking hole in its carapace. The console blinked with unfamiliar symbols, its interface alien and unyielding. Cole frowned, his fingers hovering over the controls as he tried to decipher the patterns. A low sound behind him made him spin, weapon raised. Tarsus stood in the doorway, his movements deliberate but unthreatening. "You'll trip the alarms if you guess wrong," the alien said, his voice low but firm. Cole's eyes narrowed. "How did you—" "The barriers fell when you disrupted the system," Tarsus explained, stepping closer. "You didn't think I would wait?" Cole hesitated, the tension between them palpable. Finally, he gestured toward the console. "Can you disable it?" Tarsus's mandibles twitched, and he approached the console with an air of grim determination. His spindly fingers moved with practiced precision, the symbols rearranging themselves under his touch. "We will have minutes, no more," he said. "Minutes are enough," Cole replied. The console emitted a low chime, and the lights in the chamber flickered. A moment later, alarms blared, their shrill tones echoing through the facility. Cole's jaw tightened as Tarsus turned to him, his expression unreadable. "The Vaelids will come," Tarsus said simply. "Let them," Cole muttered. He adjusted his grip on the weapon, his eyes gleaming with cold resolve. "This isn't the end." As the first shadows appeared in the corridor beyond, Cole braced himself, his mind already calculating the next step. The facility was waking, its guardians converging like predators sensing prey. But Cole wasn't prey. He was the storm they had unleashed, and with each step forward, their arrogance would cost them dearly. The alarms roared through the labyrinthine corridors like the bellow of a waking beast, a relentless cacophony of shrill tones that vibrated in Cole's skull. Every light in the facility pulsed in unison, bathing the walls in shifting hues of crimson and gold. It wasn't chaos, it was calculated warning, a predator's call to arms. He gripped the alien weapon tighter, its faint hum vibrating in his hands, and glanced toward Tarsus, whose slender frame was silhouetted against the blinking console. "They'll be here in seconds," Tarsus rasped, his voice sharp and metallic. His luminescent eyes flickered, betraying an edge of unease. "The Vaelids will not fight blindly." Cole scanned the chamber, his gaze dissecting the environment. Every curve of the bioluminescent walls, every ripple in the organic floor, every protrusion of alien tech became a variable in his mind. They were in a bottleneck, a wide room with a single entrance, easily defendable but hard to escape from. He cursed under his breath. It wasn't ideal. "We make them fight like us," Cole muttered, his voice a low growl. He moved quickly, pulling an alien device from the fallen guard's belt. Its sleek obsidian surface felt cold against his skin, and he recognized it as a proximity disruptor. A plan began to crystallize. "Tarsus, how many exits are there?" he asked, his tone brisk but calm. "Two," Tarsus replied, his claws tapping the console. "The primary corridor and a vent access point above the central conduit. The latter is small, barely enough for me, let alone you." Cole ignored the implied futility. "You're taking the vent," he said, crouching to examine the disruptor. "When they breach, they'll focus on me. That gives you time to sabotage their command uplink." Tarsus hesitated, his mandibles twitching. "And you will survive this? How?" Cole didn't answer immediately. His hands moved with precision, affixing the disruptor to the base of the console. The device pulsed faintly, its dormant power awaiting activation. Finally he stood, his expression grim but resolute. Survival's secondary. Completing the mission isn't. Before Tarsus could argue, the metallic clatter of approaching Vaelid soldiers echoed down the corridor. Their movement was rhythmic, coordinated, the march of an elite unit. Cole glanced up at the vent, then back at Tarsus. "Go, now!" Reluctantly, Tarsus slithered into the narrow opening, his iridescent form disappearing into the shadows above. The faint hiss of the vent cover sliding back into place was the only sign he'd gone. Cole exhaled sharply, his focus snapping back to the task at hand. The Vaelids were close, too close. He moved to the center of the chamber, his boots scuffing against the textured floor. His pulse thudded in his ears, but his mind remained clear. The disruptor was his opening gambit, a tool to fracture their cohesion. If the Vaelids operated as a unit, they'd overwhelm him in seconds. But if he could exploit their reliance on synchronized neural communication, he could buy the time he needed. The first Vaelid appeared in the corridor, its massive frame blocking the flickering light behind it. Its compound eyes glimmered with cold malice as it raised a weapon, an alien rifle that hissed with stored energy. Cole didn't wait. He fired first. The shot wasn't precise, it didn't need to be. The plasma bolt struck the floor near the Vaelid's feet, sending a burst of sparks and heat into the air. The creature recoiled, its movements jerky as it adjusted to the unexpected attack. Behind it, more Vaelids poured into the room, their mandibles clicking in agitation. Cole activated the disruptor. A high-pitched whine filled the chamber, followed by a sudden shift in the Vaelids' movements. They faltered, their precision giving way to erratic steps. The neural link that connected them was compromised, each soldier forced to rely on individual reflexes. He didn't waste the advantage. Darting toward the nearest guard, he fired another shot, the plasma bolt searing through the joint in its exoskeleton. The alien crumpled with a guttural screech, its weapon clattering to the floor. Cole snatched it up, dual-wielding both rifles as he turned to face the others. The room erupted into chaos. The Vaelids attempted to regroup, their movements uncoordinated but still dangerous. Cole ducked behind the console, the acrid scent of burning metal filling his nostrils as plasma bolts hissed past him. Each shot they fired was a calculated risk. Every missed strike meant another second closer to disrupting their command structure. Above him, the vent cover rattled faintly. He glanced up and saw Tarsus's faint glow as the alien moved through the ducts. Cole's chest tightened. If Tarsus failed, this entire plan would collapse. He couldn't think about that now. The Vaelids pressed forward, their weapons blazing. Cole gritted his teeth, leaning out from cover to fire. The plasma rifle kicked against his shoulder, its heat seeping into his fingers. He aimed for the joints in their limbs, the soft gaps between their armored plates. Each hit slowed them, forced them to stumble, but it wasn't enough to stop them. He adjusted his strategy. The console offered little cover now, its edges scorched and jagged from repeated impacts. He moved quickly, diving toward the nearest downed Vaelid. The creature twitched weakly, its thoracic plate shattered. Cole grabbed its grenade-like device, something he had seen used in combat but hadn't dared test until now. Pressing the activation rune, he hurled the device toward the center of the advancing group. It detonated with a deafening crack, releasing a concussive wave that sent the Vaelids sprawling. The force of the blast rattled his teeth and left a metallic taste on his tongue. But it gave him the opening he needed. Cole surged forward, his boots pounding against the floor as he closed the gap between himself and the remaining guards. The air was thick with smoke and the acrid stench of burned flesh. He fired relentlessly, his shots methodical and precise. The Vaelids, disoriented and fragmented, struggled to regroup. In the chaos, a low guttural sound echoed from the vent above. Cole's heart skipped. A moment later, the lights in the chamber flickered and dimmed. The disruptor's whine deepened, its effects amplifying. Tarsus had done it. He'd severed the uplink. The remaining Vaelids froze, their compound eyes flickering erratically. Cole didn't hesitate. He moved with ruthless efficiency, targeting each soldier with precision. The room fell silent, save for the faint hum of the disruptor. Tarsus dropped from the vent, landing awkwardly but upright. His luminous eyes met Cole's, and for a brief moment, neither spoke. The weight of what they had just done hung heavy in the air. "You're still alive," Tarsus said finally, his tone a mixture of surprise and begrudging respect. "Not for lack of trying," Cole muttered, his voice rough. He gestured toward the corridor. "We're not done yet. This was just the start." Tarsus nodded, his mandibles twitching. "Then we move, quickly." As they disappeared into the flickering shadows, the echoes of the battle lingered in the chamber, a testament to the first crack in the Vaelids' armor. But Cole knew the hardest part was yet to come. The real war was waiting, just beyond the next door. The corridors stretched endlessly ahead, their pulsating walls a cruel reminder that this was not a place meant for escape. Nathan Cole moved with calculated precision, his weapon cradled tightly, its residual heat seeping into his fingers. Behind him, Tarsus followed silently, his luminous eyes darting nervously to every shadow. The faint hum of the facility's systems buzzed in Cole's ears, each sound a warning of what lay ahead. "They'll regroup soon," Tarsus murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. "The uplink's severed, but it won't hold them for long." "They don't need long," Cole replied, his tone clipped. "This ends here." They rounded a corner, the air growing heavier, saturated with the metallic tang of ozone and the faint, acrid scent of scorched circuits. The central control chamber loomed ahead, its massive door a seamless slab of alien alloy, pulsing faintly with an ominous green light. This was the nerve center of the Vaelid operation, the heart of the beast. Beyond that door lay the key to their invasion fleet, still lurking in hyperspace, waiting for the signal to strike. Cole's hand hovered over the access panel, its alien symbols glowing faintly. Tarsus stepped forward, his spindly fingers dancing across the console with practiced ease. The panel emitted a low chime, the door shuddering as it began to part, its edges retracting like the jaws of a predator. Inside, the chamber pulsed with life. Bioluminescent structures lined the walls, their shifting colors casting eerie shadows across the floor. In the center of the room, a massive crystalline array hummed softly, its intricate lattice glowing with unearthly energy. The Vaelids' beacon. It was beautiful in a way that felt wrong, an object of alien elegance that radiated power and menace in equal measure. Cole stepped forward, his boots echoing against the smooth floor. He felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him, heavy and unyielding. This was the pivot point. Everything they had fought for, sacrificed for, hinged on what happened next. "You won't have time to destroy it conventionally," Tarsus said, his voice tense. "They're coming." Cole glanced over his shoulder, his expression hard. "Then I'll improvise." Before Tarsus could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps reverberated down the corridor. It wasn't the uncoordinated scuttle of disoriented guards. It was precise, deliberate. Elite soldiers. The Vaelids weren't holding back anymore. The first of them burst into the chamber, their exoskeletons gleaming under the flickering light. Cole fired without hesitation, the plasma rifle kicking against his shoulder. The bolt struck true, searing through the lead soldier's thoracic joint. The alien crumpled, but more followed, their movement swift and unrelenting. "Keep them off me!" Cole barked, his voice cutting through the chaos. Tarsus nodded reluctantly, picking up a discarded alien weapon. His movements were shaky but determined as he fired, the recoil throwing him off balance. Cole didn't have time to correct him. He sprinted toward the beacon, weaving through bursts of plasma fire that scorched the air around him. The heat singed his skin, the acrid smell clawing at his throat, but he pushed forward. The beacon's energy thrummed in his chest, a relentless vibration that seemed to resonate with his very bones. He reached the crystalline structure, its surface radiating a faint heat that prickled against his skin. He slammed the disruptor device against its base, the metal sparking as it adhered. A guttural roar tore through the chamber, and Cole turned to see the Vaelid commander entering the fray. Its towering form was a nightmare of serrated limbs and gleaming carapace, its compound eyes locking onto him with predatory intent. It moved with terrifying speed, closing the distance in a blur. Cole raised his weapon, but the alien was faster. It swiped with a bladed arm, the force of the strike knocking the rifle from his hands. He staggered back, pain lancing through his ribs as he struggled to regain his footing. "You think you've won?" the Vaelid hissed, its voice a grating rasp that echoed through the chamber. "You are nothing, a brittle, fleeting thing." Cole clenched his fists, his breathing ragged but his gaze unwavering. "Maybe," he said, his voice low but steady. "But we don't break, we adapt." He lunged forward, ducking under the alien's next strike. His hand closed around a fallen plasma rifle, and he fired point-blank into the Vaelid's abdomen. The shot tore through its exoskeleton, the acrid stench of burning flesh filling the air as the creature screeched in pain. Behind him, Tarsus shouted something, his voice drowned out by the chaos. The disruptor emitted a high-pitched whine, its energy building to a crescendo. Cole didn't need to hear the warning. He knew what it meant. The beacon was going critical. He turned toward Tarsus, his voice a bark of command. "Get out! Now!" The alien hesitated, his luminous eyes wide with fear. Then he nodded, scrambling toward the corridor as the beacon's glow intensified, its light blinding. Cole followed, his lungs burning as he sprinted. The walls trembled, the ground buckling beneath his feet. The beacon's energy surged, a wave of heat and light that chased them down the corridor like an angry god. They burst into the open air just as the facility erupted behind them. The shock wave hurled them forward, the deafening roar of the explosion drowning out all other sound. Cole hit the ground hard, the impact jarring every bone in his body. For a moment there was nothing but darkness and the faint, acrid taste of smoke on his tongue. When he opened his eyes, the sky above was streaked with the fading trails of the Vaelid fleet retreating into hyperspace. The beacon was gone. The invasion had been stopped. Tarsus lay nearby, his movements slow but steady. He turned to Cole, his expression unreadable. "You did it." Cole sat up slowly, his body screaming in protest. He looked back at the smoldering remains of the facility, the realization sinking in. They had won, but at a cost. The weight of those left behind pressed heavily on him, but he pushed it aside. There was no room for hesitation now. "They'll think twice before underestimating us again," Cole said quietly, his voice carrying the edge of hard-won triumph. Tarsus tilted his head, his mandibles twitching. Humans, always adapting, always surprising. Cole managed a faint, wry smile. "It's what we do." He rose to his feet, battered but unbroken, and stared out at the horizon. The Vaelids had learned a costly lesson, one they wouldn't forget. Humanity's strength wasn't in their bodies or their technology. It was in their ability to observe, to adapt, and to fight with everything they had, no matter the odds. As the distant stars flickered against the dark sky, Cole's voice carried softly but firmly, a promise to the universe. "They laughed at us," he said, "but we always get the last word.